smiling face. That would be fantastic. And the reason I'm excited that Jason is the person to talk about this subject is because he's done that for 20 years. And while he hasn't told me this story, I guarantee you there were bad days, ugly meetings, dysfunction. Some things went brilliantly, some things went badly, right? And that is how you can start to identify the trends going forward. So Jason Baragry, who's going to give us a presentation on what are the trends that are emerging, and most importantly, what you can do about them and ride those trends like a wave instead of have them ride you. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Chris. I've definitely got some scars. I'm sure there's plenty of people here that have scars as well. So let's share some more stories. My job in RDoc is to do research in the industry. I've worked in the industry for a long time as a consultant and a chief architect, and now I work in a tool company. But my job is to research the industry and drive that into product support, and that's what I was product strategy, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. What are the trends that we're seeing in the industry? How can we, how can you deal with those? So the first thing is just to give us a framework to talk about it. Enterprise architects, maybe the biggest problem we see in enterprise architecture is teams that focus solely on doing enterprise architecture. Their goal is to just do enterprise architecture. The ones that are successful, they're doing enterprise architecture to drive forward the business. I know that might sound like a strange distinction, but there are far too many people whose purpose is just to document or just to precisely model the way things are, but not to get use out of it. So we want to focus very strongly on what is the value proposition that you're providing to your company. And we see that enterprise architecture breaks down into these three big buckets. We want to support how a company, and they're increasingly digital, whether the companies know it themselves or not, all businesses are digital businesses. And change is increasing in speed, and the amount of IT intensiveness, the digitalization, is increasing. Change is getting increasingly hard. So when we talk about how does enterprise architect enable continual digital business design, continual digital business evolution, it just starts with getting control of your as-is situation. That's the absolute first thing. You want to drive forward change, but if you don't have control of where you are, then you can't be as good a support as you possibly can be. So providing this transparency, as businesses become more digital, as they become more IT intensive, it is much harder to understand how business operates through IT. It's just a black box. And if you take that thought to its logical conclusion, it's not a nice thing to say, but it is absolutely true that many business leaders today have no idea how their company operates in practice because they do not understand how it flows through IT. They do not understand the consequences of how they want to drive their business forward because it is this black box. So we have to open it up. We have to make it transparent. When change is happening so much, we have to provide a controlled, governed operation. The absolute, how can I put this? When you speak to CIOs, when you speak to VPs, when you speak to COOs, they can handle bad news. All business people handle bad news. They get it all the time. What they really don't like is surprises. Yeah, so at the beginning of a budget cycle or a strategy cycle, your VP will have a goal. This is where we want to go as a business. This is what we want to achieve. And that will result in change to IT. If you can give them stability, if you can give them confidence in how you drive that forward, that's the best you can hope for. Even if sometimes you have to say, no, that's not possible, or we can't do it this quarter or this increment, we have to do it later. That's okay. But if you get unexpected problems because some end of life happened on one of our systems and we have to spend 3 months replacing this or upgrading this application, which means 3 months where we're not delivering value as a company, that is the absolute worst thing you can say. So providing providing controlled operations, minimize the run cost, so you maximize the change spend. That's like the very first thing. And then we go into change, where many of enterprise architects want to be. How can we be involved in driving strategy to execution? And that requires two things. One is, how can you have a direction? Not so much a target architecture, but I'd say a target direction, because you never get to your target architecture. Change is always happening. The context around the company is always happening. So it's all about adjusting the direction for people to follow and making that visible for everybody. And the second part, this is probably the hardest part I've ever dealt with in my career, and I know many of the companies I talk to. How do you prioritize? There is always more ideas than there are people and capacity to do things. What should we do and why? How does an enterprise architect help in that process to make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck as a company? Now, that's a big thing. This is where we want to get enterprise architects to really become not part of the, in one of the jobs I had, we used to be jokingly referred to as the department of no. And you don't want to be the department that people come to and say, can we do this? And you say no. You want to be the group of people who say, these are the possibilities. I understand what you're trying to achieve. This is possible now. This would be a second step. If we adjust your idea, then we can go this way instead. Becoming the department of possibility instead of the department of no. So that's the next step, the next value proposition for EA. And then the third thing, and this is what we see very progressive organizations working on. And sometimes it's the enterprise architects that are explicitly taking part in this process. And sometimes it's enterprise architects who are reacting to this happening and figuring out what to do. And that is, how do you deal with continuous change in how you do your way of working in the company? So we have the company as a whole, that's the enterprise itself that we're sometimes designing. But within that system, we have the system that changes the system. The group of the organization that's doing the development work often, or procurement and driving forward new solutions. You can think of them as a system too. How can they work so they can deliver change in a better way? And that happens in a continuous process. More and more companies are moving over to these, either project to product or value stream based approach or product areas, whatever you call it. It's all about how do you improve the throughput of change in your organization? How do you organize yourselves so you don't have this distinction between business and IT? How can you distribute decision making? This is not a one-step process. This is a continuous iteration, continuous feedback loop. And it has a consequence for enterprise architects. We'll talk a bit about this today, and that is the need to democratize enterprise architecture, the need to go away from centralized teams, or maybe not go away from, but to reduce the capacity of centralized teams and spread out the decision-making of enterprise architecture in an organization. So they're the three big buckets that we think about when we think about how do enterprise architects work. Enterprise architects work to deliver outcomes. So now let's look at a few trends, and then we'll push those back into this framework to help explain the trends. So the first trend we'll talk about is digital twin of the organization. This term has been around for a few years now. I think it was introduced by Gartner a while ago. The term's not so important. The principle that underlies it is important. And the principle is that in order to deliver outcomes as an enterprise architecture team or federated team, you're trying to help people in your organization make decisions, either about running the business or changing the business or way of working. And the way you do that is to take the traditional enterprise architecture models and combine them with business behavior. What are the events that are happening inside your company that, combined with your architecture, help people make decisions faster and with better quality. That's what we talk about when we talk about digital twin. So originally this idea came from creating simulations of physical processes like factories, mechanical design systems, production systems, molecular design systems I've seen as well. The idea is, instead of just changing the system and hoping for the best, can you model the system? Can you model the system and all the events that happen in the system so that you can change the simulation and you can understand how things will work better and then make changes back into the physical system? And if you apply that to enterprise architecture or apply that to an organization, if you think of the enterprise design itself, it is a system. And the subset of that organization, which is driving forward change rather than operating with the change, driving forward change, that is a system within the system. And for both of those systems, traditionally, we model them. We create our process views and we create our capability views and we map those down into different realizations. But if the way to get the most value out of it is to combine it with behavioral information. So if we take an example, right? If you model a business process for customer onboarding, you might have a very nice multiple level process showing all the different stakeholders involved and applications and all the different steps, and it may be in perfect, whatever notation you choose to use. But it doesn't really help anyone. It may help if someone says, how does that process work? I'd like to know. But that doesn't happen very often. What they want to know is, why does it take 5 days to onboard a customer? That's crazy. We can't have a customer ordering our product and then they get onboarded to our product or service in 5 days. They need to be on board now. So if you take your process and you combine it with behavior information that you're measuring from your actual application, from your actual systems, to say, you know what, from step 1 to step 2, that's instantaneous, it's fully automatic. From step 3 to step 4, it takes 3 days. And the reason it's taking 3 days is because our self-service solution is so bad that our customers keep ringing customer support, wondering what to do. If you can show that, if you can show both the process and the behavior in the process to a decision maker, then they can decide, you know what, it makes sense for us, it delivers value for us and our customers to go and make that change. But you will never be able to make that decision if you're only showing the architecture itself. It's when you overlay the behavioral events on the architecture that gives people the information they need to make decisions. That's what digital twin of the organization is about. Overlaying business architecture, application architecture, etc., with operational behavior so people can make decisions. The next trend we call socio-technical architecture. Socio-technical architecture is an underlying enterprise design principle. The concept of open socio-technical systems, or open systems in enterprise design theory. So this is a very underlying principle. The concept is that for the last, 50 years, since maybe the late 60s, early 70s, it's been a trend in enterprise design or management theory. Treat people like resources, human resources, HR. I mean, the problem is in the name. Treat people like dumb automatons and try and have a centralized command and control structure to tell them what to do and how to do it. But the trend in the last 10 years at least has been to go a different way. It's to recognize that people are not robots. People are not just resources in a spreadsheet, especially for us that work in knowledge-based systems or sort of knowledge areas. People are incredibly knowledgeable. People are very motivated. People are very creative. Instead of having a command and control infrastructure to tell them what to do, people are waking up to having, okay, let's organize teams, or let's make it possible for teams to organize themselves in order to solve a problem. We don't need to tell individuals with a very strong hierarchic management structure how to solve a problem. We need to identify areas of autonomy in our company. We need to explain to them what the objective is and the key results. And we need to allow them to identify these people with the most knowledge of how things work in detail, allow them to create the solution, allow them to deliver the solution over time, allow them to use their creativity to come together in different ways with their skills. So it's all about opening up a business, distributing a business, distributing the autonomy, but at a fundamental level, it's about empowering people. So we see this trend, and we'll talk about it in a minute. We see it in many techniques, in many ceremonies now, but this is the underlying principle. Let's just explain that. So for many organizations, it's all about how do we get more throughput of change? How do we deliver more to the market, to our customers and our partners? How do we do it in a more reliable way, in a higher quality way, and faster time to value, right? Continuous improvement. The underlying principle that many people are using, whether they know it or not, is this socio-technical architecture. It's understanding that a command and control infrastructure is a bottleneck to decision making. It may help in the initial investment process, that may be okay, but there will always be escalations afterwards. Because you have a rigid hierarchy, people have to be prioritized across multiple different teams. In order to do that, you need to create projects. Quite often, they need to have deadlines so they can be funded. As things change, it's really hard to change the scope and direction of a project. So you start escalating, you start dealing with change, you start dealing with ripple effects across projects. But if we go over to more of this distributed decision making, more of this agile approach to cross-functional teams that can organize themselves in a more fluid way and understand where they can take their own decisions, then we get more throughput. We don't want to do it in an undisciplined way. We want to make sure it's disciplined. Agile requires discipline, but we want to make it possible. But not many people speak about this principle of empowering people. They often talk about techniques, which is the next part. Going from projects to product areas is one term that people use in the industry. Another is to use value stream-based development. And you may do that in your own agile way, or you may use a framework like SAFe or disciplined agile delivery. Or you may use the term biz DevOps or something similar. The point is these are the books that many people are reading now. These are the techniques that many people are applying. These are fundamental. It's follow step-by-step instructions on how to achieve this distribution of autonomy. One of the problems we see is if you try and do something like project to product without understanding the principle of socio-technical architecture, then you're cargo culting, as it's known in the industry, right? You're applying the technique without understanding the principle. If you have a command and control hierarchy and try and use product areas instead of projects, it's going to fail eventually. Just like the way people fail if they try and apply agile techniques without understanding the principles of agile. If you just try and apply the technique, you will eventually fail. So assuming people go around this loop, they understand the principle, they start achieving, they start implementing techniques such as project to product, then one of the consequences of that is enterprise architecture as we know it gets democratized. As teams get more autonomy to take more decisions, enterprise architecture decisions move out to the product teams or value stream teams rather than being centralized. Now, not everything can be distributed. There will always be things that go across value streams or product areas. So there will always be a need for enterprise architects that work across the organization. But one of the goals is to understand that we won't always be making centralized decisions. Sometimes we'll be enabling the setup so that other people can take decisions in a federated way. So let's go into that. So if we go back into business IT, transparency and governance, I'll just quickly reiterate, it's about making things visible. It's about having your traditional enterprise architecture information and combining that with the organization information, people, departments, teams, value streams, whatever it is, and understanding enough so that you can control what you're doing to enable change. And as an example of what does it mean from digital twin and what does it mean from socio-technical architecture, we see that enterprise architects are now applying behavioral information from digital twin, such as measuring non-functional requirements issues, applying those onto the enterprise architecture. Something as simple as applying cost information or including cost information in their enterprise architecture models and rolling those up so that decision makers can see the consequence in a cost perspective of what they do. From a socio-technical architecture, it's understanding that the reason that you document, the reason that you model is so that other people can understand. In a medium to large scale organization, it is maybe 1% of the employee base that has a high level view of how everything hangs together. And it's probably you, right? The enterprise architect or your team. Everyone else is focused on their job. But when they need to understand, when they need to make a decision, when they need to collaborate, they need to find that information fast about how everything hangs together. And ideally, they don't have to come to you because you set things up in a way that it's easy for them to find that information. Not because you don't like talking to them, but that you get to use your time on strategic design, which is what almost all architects want to do, as well as the collaboration. If we then go over into what does that mean in terms of driving change? Well, we want to have our traditional enterprise architecture models. We want to create the current state and the future direction, and we want to document that and make it possible. But we want to do that in a way that supports the prioritization process. When people do the prioritization process, they care about three things. What is the benefit? What is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And your enterprise architecture needs to answer those questions, or it needs to facilitate the conversation to answer those questions in the fastest way and in the highest quality way so that people can make decisions about prioritization. What is the benefit? Normally that comes with the initiative, the change initiative. How long will it take? Well, in order to understand how long will it take and what will it cost, you need to very quickly understand what is a proposed solution and what is the impact into the organization. You know, which systems, which processes, which teams are going to be impacted by this proposal. And for each of those, how do we get those into the process? How can we then get their information about, okay, well, my part of the system is about so big. Now, it's going to take 2 months, 3 months. It doesn't have to be a perfect estimate. It has to be an indication of the size so that you can make a prioritization decision. And for each one of those, you can say, well, what do you already have prioritized in your backlog? Okay, well, it's going to take us two program increments or 7 or 8 sprints in order to do our part of the change. But we are currently already prioritized for the next 3 increments or the next 12 sprints. So we can't get there, and we can't even attempt this until whatever the date happens to be. And if you do that for everybody that's involved, you very quickly get an understanding of cost, benefit, and time. And from there, it's not to quickly make a yes or no decision. It's almost always to start negotiating. This is where you start becoming the department of possibilities. Okay, we have an idea for a change initiative now to go to market, deliver this new product or service idea. The way you currently envisage that, we can see a timeline of where the different people, the different teams need to be involved when they can do their work. But if we change and say, look, instead of going to market with a full covering all our channels, let's just go to market just with a mobile channel, and let's make it fully digital so that we don't have to involve customer service. And let's try and do it with a soft launch with a particular part of our customer base which are comfortable using our mobile channels. And let's test if the concept works. Let's actually find out. And if it does work, then we set up phase 2 and phase 3, where we build out the solution. It's when you can start having that conversation that you start becoming an enterprise architect that's part of the co-design for your company rather than the Department of No. And it's when you start showing that you can provide bang for the buck. Yeah? It's about getting value out to the market. It's about you who really understands how the business operates through IT, facilitating the conversations with the distributed value streams or product areas in order to show possibilities to make changes. And the way you do that is on top of your enterprise architecture, you need to show what's happening in terms of change initiatives. You need to show the change initiative process from ideation through prioritization to actual execution in individual value streams and teams, being able to show changes in status. Okay, now this part of this change initiative is finished, which means this team could potentially be reprioritized to help with a new initiative, which we think is very important. In terms of the people are the ones who have the knowledge about, it's not always the enterprise architect who understands everything. They have a shallow overview and probably go deep in a few areas, but they know who to talk to who have the depth in all the areas. How do you facilitate that process? How can you include in your enterprise architecture all the people, teams, and value streams so that you know who to talk to, or probably better, so that they know who to talk to, so they can work together to develop new ideas, develop new possibilities. And when you do that, you start understanding the impact, you start showing the connection between these teams and strategies so that they can come up with more ideas. You can use them to be the knowledge, the fantastic creative knowledge workers that they are. It's not about you just doing all the work and distributing the load. You're facilitating people working together to get more throughput, to get more value out into the market. And we can go on to the third one, which is this: how do you as an enterprise architect help with this continuous way of working? So we just talked about the change process and how important it is to understand the change process and actually have it part of the enterprise architecture. Once you have that, you can start measuring improvements in the change process. So change process is about getting feedback about how you develop change, and feedback about how you democratize change. So your goal is to move away from plan, build, run to continuous value creation. But you still have these many steps. You have your ideation step, and you have your prioritization step, and you have, if things fit in one value stream, that's great. Then it can be passed to that value stream and they can determine a solution. But there will always be some things which cross value streams and teams or autonomy areas. And then you need to go through the process we just discussed. You can measure that process. How many of our change initiatives require going across different value streams or teams? What is the trend over time? How can we change our value streams, reassign teams so that have different areas of responsibility so that we can get more throughput? Because when we have to prioritize across teams that have their own priorities, that's when things are hard. Yeah? It will never be possible, well, I've never seen it possible, to identify value streams and product areas perfectly so that everything can be isolated. You may be able to reduce the amount of cross-area prioritization you need to do, but I've never seen it eliminated. But you're trying to do that. How can you continuously change? You need to measure lead times, measure prioritization times. You need to measure team handoffs, because those friction points between teams are where you are wasting time generating value in the marketplace. And once you measure, you apply that onto your enterprise architecture to show, okay, maybe we can reassign teams. Maybe we can use team topologies in a way to understand, let's split these teams so that one is delivering customer value, but another part is now focused on delivering some of the plumbing, which we see is always needed in all of our change applications. Doing organizational, what's the term? I've just lost it. There's organizational analysis, which will show you communication handovers between teams. How can you analyze that, measure it, and overlay it? How can you include people in the process who probably understand this better than you within their area? Include them in the process so they can help you adjust the enterprise design to get more throughput, to improve the way of working. So that was a quick look at enterprise architecture trends. So we start by just saying enterprise architecture, there are 3 types of value. Whether they're 3 or 4 or 5, how you categorize it is not so important. But the point is that there are different types of things that we do. And we have these major trends. One is all about adding behavior of your company onto the enterprise architecture, the traditional structural architecture, so that you can help make better decisions in those 3 areas of controlling the as is, or driving change, or improving how you drive change. And the other one was socio-technical architecture, which is all about how do you get the most out of people? How do you treat people not as a resource, but as the creative, motivated, proactive knowledge workers that they are, and allow them to take some of the autonomy for decision making. And as enterprise architects, sometimes it can be a bit scary. So I haven't seen a reduction in the need for enterprise architecture. It's just about where it happens and how it happens. And there will always be a need for enterprise architects to make these kinds of decisions that go across. But sometimes those decisions are happening out in the teams or value streams. Sometimes they're happening centrally, because that's where it makes sense to happen. But there's a need for an enterprise architect who can enable that to happen. So instead of just making decisions or just doing documentation, it's now about facilitating how others can participate in those decision-making processes, those documentation processes. So if you wanted to have a takeaway that you could use tomorrow, I'd start with, what are the outcomes you're trying to provide? Not so much how do I do enterprise architecture, because one of the things we've found is there's a huge difference between, let's say, between precision and usefulness. Many enterprise architects try and be precise. We must model or document exactly how things work. But you end up with something so complicated that no one else apart from yourself can understand it. There's a big difference between that and saying, how can I produce something useful? Because these teams over here need to drive forward their own decision making. I need to provide something useful so that my VP of B2B sales understands possibilities rather than a yes/no. That's a different mentality. It starts with outcomes you want to achieve. And then once you have that, you're all about, how can we have a democratized enterprise architecture process that improves the quality of decision making for these outcomes, improves the time to decision making for these outcomes. If you can talk to your CIO or to your VP, and whenever they say, how hard can that be? How complicated is that? When can I have it? If you can answer that question in a week instead of 3 months with better quality so that they can make a decision about prioritization, then that is a huge change in the value that you're bringing to a company. So I'll leave you there and say that's our approach, or that's how we see trends in the marketplace. It's not so much about new trends, it's about how these principles of adding behavior and dealing with people, how they, and the democratization that ensues, it's about how do you incorporate those things into existing techniques that we do.
Well, Jason, thank you very much. I was going to ask you a question, and then someone actually asked almost exactly the same question. And part of this you included in your presentation, but let me ask it anyway. You're going to hate this comparison, but I'll say it anyway. There have been historical examples where leaders have delegated everything externally, let everybody do their own thing, just say some basic vague stuff and see what happens. Two famous people who did that are Adolf Hitler and Putin. And you can see what the outcome is, because they don't have what you're suggesting. And that is what I'd like you to spend a little bit more time on, and that reflects one of the questions. Let me read the question very clearly. First, he says, thank you very much for the enlightening presentation. What competencies does the enterprise architecture organization need to build to improve in order to be able to get to the level of capabilities you've described? Now, you said some of that, but it's easy for people to go command and control, right? Because it feels, even though it doesn't work, it feels like you're in control. What do you say to the people who you're kind of saying, let go those hands a little bit? How do they do that? Can you talk about that?
Okay, that's a tough one. So thanks. You're right. It's an interesting way to frame the question with what's going on in the world at the moment. But if I can riff on that one with the people that you named, maybe one of the famous terms that came from those people as well is trust but verify. So in enterprise architecture terms, that's something that you can adopt also. One of the things I said as we went along is Agile requires discipline.
Right. Talk more about that. That's really important.
Right. So what we're talking about here is not anarchy. It's not giving carte blanche control to people. It's about distributing some of the autonomy. But those people are part of a process. You're all part of the same organism, the same organization. People can't lose sight of that. So what you're saying to people is, I trust you to make decisions within this product area, but your job as the top level enterprise architect and some of the capabilities you're talking about is being able to define and document what those domains of autonomy are and why, communicating them in a good way. Most people, one of the terms I like to use, if you've heard of the term Hanlon's razor, Hanlon's razor goes something like, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. But if you drop stupidity and just say, explained by lack of information, right? Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by lack of information. Just me keeping that in the back of my head. Like when I used to work as a chief architect and I had 26 different architects across 6 different countries, many different subsidiaries working, I couldn't be on top of everything. And people would always do something that I didn't like. But I would always try and remember, they're not doing it to make me unhappy. They're probably doing it because they don't understand. They're probably doing it because they do not have enough information. They want to do the right thing, but they don't have the information to do the right thing. So it's my problem. If they're doing something I don't like, it's my problem to make it more obvious where they can take their own decisions and why, and where they need to communicate either with me or with a colleague in a different team. And that's something that enterprise architects need to, as part of the competence, right? Trust, but verify. And when you verify, it's not because someone's trying to do the wrong thing. It's a kick up the bum for you to say, I need to enable them to work better. They are probably trying to do the right thing. And I would say in 9 times out of 10, people try and do the right thing, but there's always a spectrum of competence. Help them do the right thing, measure.
So Jason, I hear in that, if I'm, again, you and I are working together in the same company, I'm hearing 2 major dimensions. One is hiring and keeping people who share your values, trust, level of collaboration, etc. Right? Because you cannot fix a diabolical Machiavellian actor in your organization who's just out for themselves. You just can't fix that. You got to get rid of those people, in my opinion, and don't hire them to begin with if you can avoid it, right? So that was the first piece. And then the second piece, which I think is what the questioner is focusing on, is so you got all this autonomy, but you only have so much autonomy. So that seems to be where the magic is to tell them you have autonomy within these bounds. It's almost like you directed someone, I want you to go decorate this room in your house, but stick to the basic motif for the rest of the house. Yes. Right? So they know not to put pastel colored wallpaper or something up if the rest of the house doesn't look like that. So I know that's a grossly simple example, but that I think is the nuance, right? Where you're saying to someone, understand our aesthetic, understand our design methodology, understand our approach, our principles, stay within those bounds. And then you get all the autonomy in the world. And by the way, I trust you, so don't do anything terrible. Am I describing that kind of right?
Yeah, that's right. As part of that that hiring process or getting people into your team process, I mean, I know it's hard. All of us have been involved in hiring processes. How do you ask the right questions? Somehow, you need to find out. I guess we all work with people who think that enterprise architecture is how can I document correctly and archimate. If someone says that, they're not the right people for this kind of role, right?
Right.
But if they are all about how can I deliver value in a controlled way according to the non-functional requirements and the principles, and should we use pastel colors or not? That's what you're trying to find out. And they're the competencies you're trying to build in your team. We all have to document according to some notation, but that's not the end goal. That's just a tool you use sometimes.
I think we're out of time on the presentation, but I assume you're open to questions. If someone sends you a question and wants to talk to you about this, that's very important, because what you're describing is a level of sophistication that is magic when it works, right? It's just magic.
It's hard.
And that's why the whole point of your talk was, what does the future include, right? What are the future trends and where are they going? So I would say to anybody on the call, if you're listening to this or listening later to this and you go, damn, that sounds really hard to do. Well, yeah, that's the future, right? Yeah. But as you take the steps to build that organization, you'll be able, at least what your North Star is. Your North Star is to get to this level of sophistication in the EA world. And the most important, I say in my book, helping humans be heroes in the age of automation. Well, you could say helping humans be heroes in the age of sophisticated enterprise architecture. Right? That's what you're helping them bring out. Yeah. Maybe I can quickly change that and we'll make it enterprise architecture. Anyway.
Please do get in touch if you're interested. I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Reach out to Jason, and I want to thank Jason, you and your company, for sponsoring this event. It's incredibly helpful to do that. This was an eye-opening kind of, mind-twisting look, which is exactly what I think we're trying to do to help us think forward and think of what the sophisticated layers are. And thank you for your 19 years before this year of success, including the scars and the victories that brought you to the ability to be able to communicate this topic the way you have. Jason, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. We'll have another session coming up. I will be gone for the next hour. I have a conflict that was prior to this. So we will have Brian, I think, will step in and do the next section. and that's going to be Lee Bailey from the Tupperware Company speaking about his journey. So everybody join back up in another hour. And again, Jason, I simply say thank you very much for bringing all of your insights and ideas to a group of people who will probably send you some emails and you'll get some questions.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Chris.
All the
It's been
best.
fun.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody. See you in an hour.
Absolutely. For the rest of the audience, we'll see you in 15 minutes at the top of the hour, but we will see Chris in an hour.
Thank you,
See you
Brian.
later, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.